Hey everyone, my name is Corbin Dunn, and this is an Autodesk Fusion tutorial on how I designed this concept flower thing in Autodesk Fusion. In the last video, which I'll link to, I went about making it and described my whole build process of actually constructing it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the design by walking through the timeline in Fusion and also doing some samples on how to create the same type of thing. So let's jump into it. Alright, I'm going to rewind in the timeline by hitting the left rewind all the way arrow. And the first thing you should always do is you should create a new component. So I went create new component and named it flower. And I activated that one by hitting the activate, and I created another child called petal complete. And I actually renamed things and moved things around later, and this is just the structure I ended up with. I'm going to focus on my top one so I can walk through the entire timeline. And now I actually went and drew a sketch for what I wanted this to look like on paper, which isn't something I usually do. I'm not really a great artist. And so this is my rough sketch. And what I did is I did insert canvas, and I went and selected it from my computer and just imported and scaled it appropriately. And that gave me something to trace. So the next step was to create a sketch for the front shape. And if you look at the sketch, I'm going to hide the front canvas. It actually doesn't look anything like the canvas because I tweaked it a lot over time. And the things that I want to note here is I'm going to go ahead and edit the sketch. I used a create a spline, a control point spline to create the shape. And I only created half and then mirrored it. So what I did is I went and created the control point spline, something like this. I hit escape, typed L, select the top one, go down, create a vertical line, and snap them together. Select the middle, X to make it a construction geometry. And then I went and typed S, mirror, select the first one, and I mirrored the shape on that mirror line that I drew there. And this gives you a nice mirrored shape that you can tweak. And I may kind of flat at the bottom like this right here in order to get to be to sit on a table effectively. And I'm going to go ahead and undo this. And in case it's not obvious, that's the view of one of these petals directly heading on in 2 dimensions. So the next thing I did is I went and created another canvas, the exact same image, because it had my side too, and imported the side. So I have the front canvas and the side canvas, all about the origin. And I could use that to draw one of my side petals. So I created another sketch, and I drew the side petal. Go ahead and edit it, click on the right to focus it. And if you notice when I edit sketches, it doesn't automatically look at it. A lot of times it will look at the sketch. I turned this feature off in my settings because it bothered me. So this is my side profile. And what this is, when you look on the bowl here, that's the outer fattest part of the profile of each of these. Now the next thing I need to draw is going to be the sharp edge here, which is kind of between the 2 shapes there, the midpoint, the middle line. So I'm going to hide these canvases to make things a little simpler. And I created another sketch called mid, and looking at the right profile, it's just a sketch line between the 2 for that nice sharp edge. And I should emphasize another point here by looking at all 3 sketches and seeing something I did that's really important. So I drew the front first, and we want the top dot here to line up with the top dot of all these other sketches on the side, and we want the bottom to also line up. So on this right sketch, if I go ahead and edit it and look at it again, we'll see some purple geometry here. And there's a purple projected point here and a purple projected point, well, it's right here. This point doesn't exist in the front shape. And then if I look at the right side again, I projected the top of this and drew a horizontal line so I could line up this guy perfectly horizontal with the top of this other profile. And those things are pretty important. And if you don't know how to project, if you just want to, say, pull this dot over into your other sketch, P for project, and then you just click on what you want to project. Make sure you select projection link, so it's linked, specified entities, not a body. And once you do that, it's going to create them as a purple dot. So if I hide the front and just look at it, these are the two dots that I'd be bringing in, but I'm not going to do it now. So the next sketch was to create this center line. And now the next one is confusing. I call it a 3D sketch. And if I click on it here, and we look at all the sketches, what this is it takes this midline here from the right side, the midline that's dark blue, and it takes each of these sides from the front, and it's a 3D intersection of where those surfaces would meet. And to emphasize that, we could go ahead and do this manually. And this isn't the way to do it. This is just how, as an example of what this is doing. In the surface modeling, if I extrude, and I select this little line here, pull it out, it extrudes a surface from that line, perpendicular to wherever the lines was drawn. And now if I take my mid one here, and I do the same thing, I extrude it out. Now notice that this purple curve in 3D, I'm going to hide the front, right, and mid. So that purple curve there is perfectly intersected with where those guys are. And Fusion has a feature to do that automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those two surfaces. And what I did is I went and created a sketch, and it can be anywhere for this particular thing. I'm going to hide my 3D sketch and just do it again. And I want to create the intersection of those two guys. So I want to create the intersection of my mid and my front. So these sketches here that are kind of light gray, I go create, project, include, and intersection curve. I can select that curve and the other curve on the other sketch. And what it does is it creates this 3D sketch for where those would intersect. And I have to do it for both sides. So project, include, intersection curve, here, here, okay. And so now if I hide the mid and front, I get this really cool 3D sketch. And the beautiful thing about this sketch is that you can manipulate your front and your right sides, and it will update alive. So I could tweak this guy by pulling it out, or pull this guy in if I wasn't editing another sketch. So here I could tweak these guys if I really wanted to. It's going to cause a lot of downstream problems, but sorry, the mid one is the one that's driving it. So I can make it fatter, make it go up here thinner. And this is pretty important when you're machining. When you're actually creating something for real, you have to make sure that you can actually reach all the areas with a bit. And so frequently I'll have to go back to my design and change things when I find out I'll have a bit collision. Okay, so that sketch that I just created, I don't need because I already did it. It's called 3D. And the next part is lofting and surfaces. And if I go forward in the timeline, I create a loft. So that's create in the surface modeling a loft. And I'm just going to go ahead and edit the one by double clicking on it to show you what I did. And so the way to read this, profile 1 is where we're starting, which is that outside edge, the right sketch here. Sorry, that's the 3D edge. I'm going to simplify it, showing stuff. So the 3D one, and that's the sharp line in my piece here. And then it's going to go to the middle one. sorry, it's not going to go to the middle one. I want to go to the bottom sketch. So on the right side, it goes to my bottom sketch. So if I looked at this on the right, it creates a flat fattening area. And then the third one is just the other side. And the thing about this shape, this surface, it's really curvy and basically it's mathematically defined, but it's not 100% symmetric because I'm lofting from one side to another. And I'll deal with that later. There's probably better ways to do this type of loft that make it symmetric. So next, I went and I duplicated this pedal thing for doing a limit area later on, which I'm not going to even talk about at this point. It's for machining. So next I needed to do another loft for the top. So this is the same type of idea, but instead of choosing the bottom line, my right profile, I chose the top line. And so once you do this, you kind of create the basic shape of a pedal type of thing, which is sharp. But it's hollow, so it's got a hollow end here. And so you're going to have to fix that. And that's the next step. It's called surface patch. So I went create, or maybe modify. I'm not actually a great expert at surface modeling. Did patch. I'll also reference some other videos that I watched that were really helpful for me to learn a lot of these techniques. So I create a patch for these two edges, and at this point this could be a solid surface once you stitch it all together. So the next step is modify, stitch, and so in the stitch I selected those 3 different surface bodies, and as soon as you do that, the result from stitch is a body. So before we were dealing with surfaces, which are kind of a surface you can kind of think of as a piece of paper that you're folding and manipulating. And once you get 2 or 3 of those surfaces to intersect and create something that would be watertight, you can stitch them together to make a solid body. And so as soon as you make a solid body, it goes from this surface icon to the white cylinder icon, which is the body. And you can do different things with bodies. And so this is now one chunk. And so then I went and created a pattern. And this is just a circular pattern about the origin, about the z-axis, 8 times. And the cool thing is I could make the same shape with a whole bunch more, which would take forever to machine. And so the next thing, at this point I'm starting to get kind of forgetting what I did. But at this point what I wanted to do was to trim these guys up. So if I look at one of these single pedals, I click the first body and then hold down shift and click the last body, type V to hide them. So these pedals overlap and I need to trim out the shape. And so what I did is I created a sketch on the Z on the top, sorry, the XY plane, and I just drew lines on the sketch of where they would intersect with particular points on my shape. And this might be difficult or confusing. If it is, let me know. But these lines are projected lines. So what I did is I found the pedals that were next to it. Let's see which ones, these guys here. And you can project the intersection of the curves. So project, and I projected this shape here, and the result of doing that is what you see in my sketch. It's these crazy shapes here. In purple, purple is projection. So what I have here is these 2 lines cutting out a pie shape effectively. And so I can go ahead and now extrude up those 2 lines, another surface trick. So I took them and I extruded them up, and then I needed it to go all the way through this piece because I want to cut it. So I extruded them out a little bit. I'm not sure if that's actually necessary. Then the next step was to split. So I wanted to take my single petal and to cut it, to chop off these sides. And so that's a split. So we're going to go over to solid modeling because we created a solid. And we can go split body. And so I went and split bodied. Here's the body. I chose that plane as the splitting tool. And I hit OK. And what this did is it now split this body into multiple pieces, which will become more apparent once I do the next one. So I did another split body for the same thing using this other side. And once I do that, I can start removing stuff that's not important. So I can remove those two surfaces because I don't need them. And now I need to remove these two chunks here. And I'm also going to remove all these other petals here. So I did a whole bunch of removes. Chun, chun. And so now I'm left with a single petal that could be replicated around again, but they won't be intersecting. And these surfaces here are perfectly vertical, meaning I could glue them together and machine them accurately. And I was having problems with it mirroring correctly once I realized a circular pattern was not working. So I split this body here, this single petal, right amongst the basic ZX axis. So I just chose this axis here to split it exactly in half. So now I have half that body, and then I could go ahead and mirror it. And so once I mirror it, this thing is now perfectly symmetrical. And I removed, mirrored it and joined them together, and I can remove the old half. All right, so at this point, this is the shape I wanted to machine and to create. And I had to figure out a way to make this shape as the next step. So I like to model my stock. So I create a new component under the main one, called it stock. And what this does is it lets me go ahead and create a sketch for the rough stock size. I'm going to go ahead and look at the left view. And what I did is I just drew a rectangle around my stock. And the things to think about when you do this would be grain orientation for when you're cutting stuff out and gluing up wood, because you're going to glue up the wood flat pieces and make this shape. And yeah, you don't want to glue up a lot of pieces vertically because the top would be a lot ingrained and probably snap off. So it really needs to be the long lengthwise grain when you're making something that's a shape like this. So I drew up the basic size of what the stock would look like. And then I could go ahead and extrude it. And I just visually extruded it until it basically covered the whole shape. It actually doesn't look like it did in this picture. And the next thing, body to component. So sometimes I create these things as bodies and then I want to replicate them. So this single petal here I want to replicate as a component. So I went and selected it, and if you don't know about this, you can right click, create components from bodies to create a body from a single, or to create a component from a single body. So I did that, and that gave me petal no middle because I wanted to be able to machine it without the middle, and that will come up in a little bit. You may also notice that my stock is semi-transparent, and so for my stock, what I like to do is I right-click on it and I set the opacity control to be 40 or 30%. You could also do it on the body, and that way you can see through your stock when you're working on your project. So next I create another component, and it's the fixture. I'm not going to really talk about the fixture because the fixture was a complex cutout thing to hold this shape for machining, but it was something I had to create. And a lot of times I'll go back in the timeline and do things to recreate shapes and add stuff later on. Instead, let's focus on the middle. I'm going to hide the fixture. And once I had the stock created, at this point, I knew I wanted to add some inner inlay into these pieces. And so at this point, I knew how I was going to hold this pedal down, which I talked about in the last video. And I could use a vertical bit to go ahead and cut out the center area to fill it up with epoxy. And based on that knowledge that I was going to cut it vertically with a CNC bit, I could go ahead and model something based on that. And so I know for my stock being oriented this way, I'm going to have a bit come directly down to cut things. And so based on that knowledge, I went and created, I created different patterns. Yeah, I like playing with patterns. So what you see here is one pattern that I was playing with, thinking I'd machine and cut out into the shape. And I ended up not liking and using that one. And here's the other one. This is the actual one I used. So I just create a sketch on the top of the stock here. And then I can go ahead and finish sketch. Then I can go ahead and create a cutter. And so what I did is I took that shape and I extruded it down all the way where it would be all the way through and create a new body. And I did it this way because I want to use the piece multiple times for the design instead of just cutting it out. So I'm going to go ahead and show that cutter. There it is. There's the cutter. So that thing is going to be what the bit's going to do to cut out the middle of this shape. So I created another component called the middle. And the middle is going to be the epoxy portion. And a lot of times I create these components later and add them and fix them up. I applied a texture, the blue texture, to that guy. I'm going to hide the stock. And I can't remember what that was for. All right, so now is the combining. Oh yes, some of these were to replicate the shape multiple times. So combine. So in solid modeling, you can combine, and I use combine heavily. And we can take a look at this item by double clicking on it to see what I did. The target body is the pedal shape, and the tool body, the thing that's going to cut it out, is the cutter. And what I did is an intersect. And so what it's going to do is it's going to give you where these two guys would intersect together. And so if I step through, here we can see what this does. It already did the intersection. I'm going to hide the cutter. Okay, so the intersection is going to be this epoxy portion, but it's not actually cut out of the other one yet. So that's the middle. And this is strictly for the design look, to see what it would look like in Fusion. So the next step would be to actually cut out that center from it. So that's another combine. So again, I used the single pedal, and the tool body is now the cutter, and I did a cut operation. And so doing that leaves us with the middle cutout. So if I hide the middle piece, that gives me the inner shape. And that inner shape is pretty important because that's what I want to actually machine out to fill it in with epoxy. And at this point in my design, I started cleaning things up. I copied and pasted some things so that I could go ahead and just do the actual look. So again, to create the circular pattern around the center, around the z-axis, and create the look. And so at that point I had this, which was the basic look. Okay, that was a lot of information really fast. If you want me to clarify something, just post down in the comments and I will. But to recap, this is how I did surface modeling to create the shape by making one of these petals and replicating it. The key thing that I did was in the 3D sketch, or actually a 2D sketch. I created a 2D sketch of the front, a 2D sketch of the side, and then I created intersection curve to create a 3D sketch of where those two surfaces would intersect. And that was key for then doing a loft with the surfaces to create the basic shape. But the loft actually created a non-symmetric shape because of how things flow. And I had to go ahead and eventually cut in half and mirror the shape in itself to make sure it was perfectly symmetric. And a lot of these things I figured out along the way as I was making the project. So I go forward and backwards in the timeline a lot to kind of reiterate and change things until I had it the way I wanted it. And yeah, hopefully this helps you guys in your own designs and figuring out things that you want to make. Now, toolpaths and CAM for something complex like this took me a long time to figure out. And it was a lot of making jigs and figuring out how to hold things. And I talked a lot about that in the last video for how the jigs worked. And if you have any other specific questions, let me know. Thanks, everyone.